The Men's World Cup 2018, it has been a thrilling month of football, but has it lived up to all of your expectations?
Today we'll look ahead to the finals, as well as the news and politics behind this year's global event.
I'm Femi Okay.
And I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream, now live on YouTube.
This year's World Cup has so far been a source of excitement and emotional mood swings for football fans everywhere.
So with us today to talk about this is an international panel of sports enthusiasts. In Moscow is Priyansh, a journalist who's been covering the tournament. In New York State, Brenda Elsie, associate professor of history at Hofstra University and co-host of the feminist sports podcast, Burn It All Down. In London, Al Jazeera sports correspondent Lee Wellings, and also in London, fresh from the World Cup, Wilfred Ndidi, a midfielder for the Nigerian national team, also known as the Super Eagles. He also plays for Leicester City.
Let's start our discussion with the Russia question. Have a listen to what FIFA President Gianni Infantino had to say last week.
We all fell in love with Russia. All of us, everyone who has been here for a period of time now, has discovered a country that we didn't know. I was told police, people in the Red Square are smiling. When they are asked for some information, they are very friendly. This is great, and this is exactly what Russia is, and this is the new image that we have about Russia.
That was Vladimir Putin almost smiling in response to the FIFA president there. Let me just look here on my laptop. This is Lee reporting a few weeks ago from the World Cup. Lee, this idea about Russia, there was some skepticism as it being the country to host the World Cup. What was it like reporting from there? What did we miss?
Well, there was over 7 years of controversy, wasn't there? When the World Cup was first awarded by FIFA and Qatar 2022 as well, both at the same time, we had a position where people were criticising it. And in fact, most of that was being levelled at Qatar. And then eventually people started focusing on Russia. By that time, we had the big Winter Olympics doping scandal, and then Russia's politics obviously proving unpopular with lots of people. So by the time the tournament arrived, there was a lot of negativity around it, wasn't there? And I mean a lot. So I found myself there for the first week reporting on a tournament that actually was going really well. The Russian people had embraced it. So what you always had to remember is this doesn't make everything all right. This is the sanitised Russia that Vladimir Putin wanted to project. Listening to FIFA President Gianni Infantino there, well, you've got to, everything he says, take with, as the old expression goes, a pinch of salt, because he has a lot to say for himself, and not all of it is to be trusted. And of course he was going to say Russia's absolutely wonderful. It has been a brilliant World Cup, but that was always the plan, to give Russia a sanitised look.
Well, the issue of the host country has been one that our community has been quite interested in. And I hear what you're saying there, Lee. I want to play the perspective of someone in our community. This is Smith, who is an enthusiast and also a PhD student in political science. And this is what he had to say about Russia.
For me, this World Cup has given Russia the opportunity to score a lot of political points in terms of soft power. From the beginning of the Cold War in 1947, it has had a bad reputation in terms of human rights, in terms of democracy. But through this World Cup, probably it's been given the opportunity to rebrand itself as a friendly country, a country that is going to open its doors to the rest of the world when the rest of the world needs it. This is not to say that human rights and democracy are suddenly better in Russia, but international relations have always been about reputation and impressions, and this counts.
So Priyansh, you're there, and you've been there for a few weeks now. What do you make of this comment and how Russia is hosting?
Well, I mean, it was interesting that Gianni Infantino said we all fell in love with Russia. He says that with good reason, because 4 years ago in Brazil, there were, protests, and we haven't seen anything like that here. I think what's really happened is before the World Cup, in the lead up to it, there was so much negativity, as Lee rightly said. And I think the way the Western media has portrayed Russia, I think it almost created an overly negative image. So people came here expecting the worst. And that's been my experience, when I've spoken to fans from other countries, and they're like, oh, this is nothing like how we thought it would be. So I think it's definitely helped, Russia sort of present a more a welcoming picture. And if this is, we talk about hosting international major sporting events and the kind of capital that they can bring to you, the kind of soft power. And I think in that regard, it's definitely been a massive success for Putin and his regime.
Lee, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
But I think hooliganism is a classic example of that. The hooliganism issue. Before the tournament began, everyone said, look out for the hooliganism, look out for the racism. And people were saying to me, be careful out there. But I was saying I'm not expecting any trouble because it will be squashed. The government and authorities out there will make sure this looks like a wonderful place to go and watch football, and it isn't all of the time. It's like a World Cup bubble, and that's the danger, that people then say, well, what was all this negativity? Why was there so much criticism of Russia? The truth is always to be found somewhere in between. Things are never black or white.
There's so few people who can say, I have played at the World Cup. And Didi is one of them. And Didi, I just scrolled through your Twitter feed here. I love this one. Feels good to be back on the pitch. What is it like to walk out there during the World Cup, playing World Cup games? Describe.
I think, it's actually a good experience because during the end of the season, I got injured and there was this speculation of I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to go to the World Cup. But I actually trained very hard because I wanted to be at the World Cup. I really want to be at the World Cup. So the post there was just how it feels good because that was my actually first game. Going straight to the World Cup, I feel very great because every player wants to be at the World Cup. As a player, you always dream of playing at the World Cup, playing against big players and different stars you see on TV also. It was an amazing experience for me, though it didn't come out the way we wanted, but
I'm hurting inside, Ndidi, I have to say. You called the Super Eagles, and every World Cup, everybody thinks, the Super Eagles, they're going to do it. And no, but what a great game to go out on. That game against Argentina, with Nigeria playing, we almost believed you could do it. What was that game like?
Yeah, the game is a game I will never forget in my life because we had just 4 minutes because after when the game was going on, looking at the scoreboard and looking at the time, we knew we could do better at that time. We were trying our best and trying to defend, and everything just changed in the moment after scoring that goal.
Sure.
I was, not just me, the whole of the team, we felt really bad because everything we've worked for, we just couldn't hold it for just 4 minutes, So it's very painful.
I'm going to start crying now, in an objective way, of course. Yeah. Brenda, you're doing what we're doing, which is watching the World Cup, not in Russia. We're watching it from our various homes around the world. What has that experience been for you so far?
It's been really fascinating. I think when we were talking before about what we expected from Russia, the one thing I'd like to sort of add there is that I think we have to give a lot of credit to grassroots activists and community networks like the FAIR network. And they've done things like establish diversity houses in Moscow, St. Petersburg, hotlines for calling in and WhatsApping discriminatory behavior that's seen, hooliganism, racism, homophobia. So, on the one hand, I totally agree that I'm not surprised it's gone very smoothly. In fact, if you remember in Brazil in 2014, yes, there were protests at the Confederations Cup, but by the time you got to the World Cup in 2014, those protests were pretty much under wraps by the privatized security forces in Brazil as well as public forces. So, I think I've been following a lot of these efforts, and it's super encouraging. The Open Stadiums project about Iranian women, and I would just give them huge credit for the work that they're doing on the ground there.
You need to make a distinction between the Russian government and the Russian public as well. When you spoke to people across Moscow and across Russia, they're so excited about having the tournament. Why wouldn't Russia have the tournament? The largest country in the world in terms of mass. I know it was all played in the western third of Russia, but it was time really for the World Cup to be played there. And the fact that the Russian team unexpectedly ranked 32 out of 32, probably unfairly, the fact that they did so well and started with that 5-0 win against Saudi Arabia I covered. I mean, that was just incredible, and you could sense it's so important that a host nation succeeds at a World Cup. And these people, it wasn't a cliche or an easy thing to say, that they were absolutely loving it, and why wouldn't they?
So Lee, I hear that discussion. I know that there is so much more to talk about with Russia, but I want to push on just a bit now to a conversation that's been making the rounds online in our community and elsewhere. Who dominates the World Cup and why? So what you're seeing now on your screen are all the countries that have won the World Cup since the tournament start in 1930. So will Europe and South America always be on top? That is what people want to know. I bring you two tweets. The two sides of this debate, really. Tange says, African teams may have the skills and the football concept, but they lack the suitable training infrastructure. There are no good pitches for training, and this isn't just the World Cup in football, it's other international sports. On the other side of that debate, this is Niall on Twitter who says, I wouldn't say that FIFA has unfairly prioritized any team. Given the level of organization of this major event, it was all well done, and only some teams failed to put in more effort. So Priyansh, your take on, is this a question of effort, as Niall says it is, or is this a question of organization and money and capacity?
Well, I think it's definitely more a case of the latter. It's very important to say that the World Cup has always been Eurocentric, but it, of course, this thing becomes very obvious when you have an all-European semi-final, which was the case in 2006 as well. So European teams tend to do well when the tournament's played in their continent. But having said that, I do not think, once the tournament expands, Europe will gain from it as well. So I do not think it should be only seen in terms of how the tournament is being just spread out wide to get wider representation. Europe will gain from it. But we need to remember, whenever we talk of the World Cup, is that there is that a democratic impulse was always there in its conception. It wasn't just about getting the best players out or the best teams out. It's about, making it more representative. And this World Cup has been enriched by stories like Panama over here for the first time, Peru returning after 36 years. And these are the dramas and narratives you look for, because if you do want to watch the best football in terms of the quality, I would personally watch the Champions League. I wouldn't watch the World Cup.
Brenda, this isn't a new conversation that we're having about how certain teams or certain regions dominate global football. What's your take on that?
Well, the first time that anyone outside of Europe or the Americas played in a World Cup was 1966. So it's important to remember that it's not a democratic institution since its conception. It's conceived of as a European, American, writ large tournament. And, I would just say that it's, of course, not a lack of talent, or else the Premier League wouldn't be full of players from the Global South or La Liga. So obviously, it's not a case of lack of talent. It's a case of a lack of sustainable infrastructure. As the first tweeter said, it's about corruption in the federations. And it's also about global capital. Many of these teams show a colonial legacy, an extraction of labor from former colonies. You know what I'm saying? I think 14 of the French national team players are eligible to play for countries in Africa. So there's also a movement of power and capital there that is an enduring legacy of colonialism.
And Didi, you might
add something. Carlos Queiroz, the Iran manager, he was speaking at the World Cup about this, and he said that when he became the manager 7 years ago, the gap between the European teams and everybody else was lesser, and it's only growing. So I think it's definitely a trend worth looking at.
And Didi, you might be an example of some of the talent in the African continent that then gets exported out. You played for Belgium, you play for Leicester City right now, and then every couple of years you go back and play for Nigeria. I'm just wondering, how do you keep that talent, do you think, in Nigeria or on the continent? What would have to happen?
I would say it's not just me. Also, a couple of players on the team. Massive thank you also to our federation. They're doing very great. They're actually pushing the young players and making them understand the game, and knowing the fact that you just have to play with passion for your country. and it's not just about the fame and how you get exposed, or maybe you want to make a big transfer. I think is that alone has given the Nigerian team enough motivation to always want to play. So you have to go back to the World Cup against Iceland, because when we won the game, we could see how happy the country is, because for a long time we've not been so happy, because of everything going on. And so I could see the celebration and jubilation on videos after the game. So things like that also made all the players want to actually play for Nigeria,
Yeah.
So I just feel is an opportunity
Wilfred.
to actually play. Yeah.
So I wanted to bring up a comment
Sorry
live.
to butt in.
I wanted just to bring up a comment live that we just got. This is from Perrin, and really they're echoing something that you said earlier, Brenda. In a way, Perrin says, there is diversity though, isn't there? Look at the France team. Is that not diverse enough for you? But in this conversation about representation is also a look at how sports commentators are covering the games and the teams that do get there. This is a headline, Lee, that has been on the Al Jazeera website and shared for quite a while, the racist myth of the physical African football team. We actually got a video comment from the author of this piece, and I want you to have a listen and let me know what you think. Here's James.
So I wrote this article because of my larger interest in the politics of language, especially the representation in certain discourses that include sports. At the soon-to-conclude Russian games, for instance, I got tired of listening to white commentators whose unconscious bias against players of African descent manifested mostly at this discursive realm of language use. While I do realize that every athlete, black or non-black, brings a certain physicality to the game, my interest was to call out a certain media representation of African players that limited their agency or their capacities mostly to their bodies.
Lee, what do you make of that?
Yeah. I think this is a wider picture actually in the sports media. So a lot of kind words can be said about sports media, but I think a lot of it can be substandard and very lazy and cliched. And actually, when it comes to African footballers and the African football in general, I think sometimes the research is not there and people fall back onto stereotypes and actually don't really look at the teams in depth and the players in depth and understand the tactics and understand how they've been coached. I mean, we made a programme a couple of years back on Al Jazeera called Sport Matters about the lack of black coaches across football. And I'm interested if Wilfred thinks this is a problem in Africa, that actually we have a situation where black African coaches don't seem to be trusted. And is that holding back African football? Or is it the fact that teams seem to be of quite a similar standard? So you don't have an absolutely outstanding team coming and challenging, perhaps the way the Cameroon team did in the late 80s, early 90s, or Senegal did at the turn of the century. You know, is there an issue here with coaching as well as some of the attitudes towards African footballers?
I think also that as a mentality we always believe if we have this coach is better than the other coach. But I would say it all depends on the players, what they can actually give, how they can actually bring out their best during the game. Yeah, on the other side, the coaching job is also important because it gives out the tactical and information to display on the pitch. But I feel we believe having a white coach is actually not just me, the whole people on the other side. Yeah. Well, I think it's not just about that. It's not just about the coaching. It all comes from the federation. And as I said before, apart from the coach, we got motivated from the federation, trying to push us, and so we all know what we're going to do. It's not just playing; it's about representing our families, our country, try to make them proud and all. So the coaching is on another side. So yes, it's important in the game, as I said earlier, but I just feel the mindset is going to change. I feel it's going to change, but for now we're just on it. So.
All right. I have to
just
show.
to- sorry,
I have to show.
and
Just to clarify, important to say
Yeah.
that we're actually going to get an expansion in 2026 World Cup. There'll
Many more
probably be
teams.
9 African teams in that tournament, and that will obviously help the situation. But it's done for money, like everything with FIFA. It's not done to make world football better. It's not done to expand the amount of teams that the Confederation had for good, positive reasons. That will be a side effect. It's done for money.
I have to show, as we're talking about coaches and maybe African coaches, we have to show this gif here from Senegal's coach. He's the only black coach in FIFA World Cup 2018. And thank you for those emotional, passionate moments that he shared with us through the World Cup and Senegal's World Cup bid. Now, before we talk about the World Cup final, let's have a look at this scene from last night in Moscow.
We are thrilled. We are very excited. It's beautiful day for all Croatians all over the world.
The game was amazing. We're very proud of our team. We're such a small country and they just made it so much bigger. It's an amazing feeling. They've done so well. They dominated from the second half on the whole game, and we're really proud. Everyone loves it. The feeling, the vibe is amazing here. You just feel like the excitement and the love and everything that we've gone to the finals is incredible.
So on Sunday, Croatia will have its first World Cup final ever. They face France, who won the World Cup in 1998. Now, Malika, what do we need to know about these teams? What do you have?
Well, we asked our community if they're planning to watch the final. This is one person's response, Brenda. A twin says, I'm in it for Croatia. They played very well from the start in the history of the nation. They deserve the world trophy. What are you looking forward to, Brenda?
I think I'm just looking forward to, well, actually, I love the French defense. Jen Doyle, an analyst, called it a pickpocket defense. And I thought it was the funnest game to watch and, well, the funnest backline to watch. And I expect that they'll continue to be that way. I mean, all of the French offense is getting a ton of attention because they're amazingly talented, but I'm actually excited for the defense.
I have to show you Priyash. Priyash was sitting on the pitch inside a Samara arena watching Russia play Croatia. Definitely among the highlights of this World Cup. Look at that smile. Could it get any bigger? What did you learn from the Croatia's playing style from sitting that close? You could probably touch the players.
Yeah, I mean, I was also at Croatia's semi-final yesterday, and I think the things that really has stood out about their team is that they really don't give up. In the round of 16, in the quarterfinals, in the semi-finals, they were behind. They came back from behind. They won the first 2 games on penalties. Yesterday, they won in extra time. So even though there's a lot of talk whether they will be fatigued in the final, I don't think that might be a concern because they just keep fighting on. And it's an incredible story, especially for Croatia. 20 years ago, they lost to France in the semi-final after taking the lead. And now here they are again, meeting in a World Cup final. As the Croatian coach yesterday said, for 20 years, we've just talked about this game.
Lee, what about France?
I think France are the best team in the tournament. It's as simple as that. You could make an argument that Belgium might be the second best team, and that was the strongest side of the draw. I think France, the quality through them. In 1982, France had one of the first World Cups I watched on television. They had a wonderful, wonderful midfield led by Michel Platini. But this one and this team, in many ways, feels better. And actually, in 1998, I covered the scenes in Paris, hundreds of thousands. I know I don't look old enough, but I promise you I was there with hundreds of thousands of people in Paris.
Yeah.
And they hadn't really embraced the World Cup properly until Croatia scored in the semi-final. Croatia went 1-0 up, and then Lilian Thuram scored twice, really unexpectedly, his first goals for France.
Yeah.
And France won that, went on, of
We're in
course, to
extra
beat
time,
Brazil in
Lee,
the
wrap it
final.
up.
And actually, here we go. France-Croatia is going to be an absolutely brilliant game. I can't wait.
He's such a pro. Malika, what do you have?
Well, this is why you should care if you were not a football fan. Oduro on Twitter says the World Cup isn't just a sports contest. It's an intersection of other contests. Inter-race, interstate, inter-ethnic, and inter-values happenings at the World Cup have a huge symbolic effect.
Thank you to Lee, Priyash, and to Brenda and to Indidi. Thank you for watching. Malika and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.